some interesting thing where Alistair was talking about the foundations of a building and how there's so much that goes on under the ground that is so important to the structure of the building, and likewise with people, there's so much that is below the surface that we don't know or see, and people base their foundations on so many different things. But we came to the conclusion, the Bible is our foundation for our life. The Bible and its revelation of Jesus means that we can build our lives on Him. So we're going to go a little bit more into this in terms of just relating the Anchor Church values to the story of the Good Samaritan. So we have our lawyer, our expert in the law, who has challenged Jesus, and he says, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus tells him the story of the Good Samaritan, and his neighbor is the person who shows mercy, or rather, the one who's a good neighbor is the one who shows mercy, even to someone who's an enemy of theirs. So my question to you is, who is your neighbor? Is it the bully at school? According to the story of the Good Samaritan, maybe it is. The social media troll who loves to wind people up. Here's a challenging one. The LGBTQ person at school or at work, the person who is different from us and whose morals and whose behaviours we don't agree with. How do we act as a neighbour to them? Click. People who look differently from me. Throughout history, we've seen that separate groups of people across race lines, across ethnic differences and diversities. People who look differently from me. People who don't like Christians and persecute us. Even they, we are supposed to love as our neighbours. And Jesus asked the question, who proved to be a neighbour? The one who showed mercy toward him. Not just the ones we find easy to love, but the hard ones as well. These are our neighbours, and as Chris pointed out, we were gravitated to a particular heart. We had an affinity for that heart. My heart had pictures of the Aristocats, the Disney movie, because it was a cartoon I remember as a kid with great affection. But there are other people who our hearts don't naturally gravitate to, and we are supposed to show love and mercy to them as well. The answer here, what does the law say? Jesus challenges the lawyer. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. To love someone as much as you love yourself. That is what we are called to. That is what it means to have a heart for every person. So here's a question. It's not one to discuss now, but one you can take away. Who is your neighbour? Who are the people that you naturally gravitate towards? And who are the ones you struggle to show mercy, to be compassionate to show love to? God says everyone is our neighbour. Who would you struggle to cross the road for? Here's another question. You notice it's the Samaritan who provides help to the Jew, not the other way around. Who would you struggle to receive help from if they came and helped you? Now, we talk about the Bible being our foundation for life. And the lawyer who knows the scriptures extraordinarily well, that's his job, to be an expert in the law, an expert in the Torah. Wishing to justify himself, he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbour?" What he's really asking is, where's the loophole? How can I get around this? And it echoes back to the snake in the garden. Did God really say that? Does God really mean that? When I read his words in Scripture, does he really mean that? Sorry, I'll just go back a second. History tells us that the church is great at finding loopholes in Scripture. Christians have killed other Christians because of what they have read in Scripture and misinterpreted. Within living memory, we can see people using Scripture to keep their churches segregated. And if you had asked them, they would have 100% agreed with that statement: the Bible is our foundation for life. So when we engage with the Bible, we need to hold a very few things very tightly. This, the cross, what Jesus has done on the cross for us, and a lot of things a lot more loosely, and be ready to be challenged in what we read, in how we apply that to our lives. I have a loophole. I'll give you an example. I had a loophole for a very long time, and it's one that a lot of people would maybe have come across. There's this statement from J. Gresham Machen. He wrote a book called Christianity and Liberalism in around the 1920s or 1930s in response to something that was happening within the church. But he said this: the Sermon on the Mount, like all the rest of the New Testament, really leads a man straight to the foot of the cross. And I 100% agree with that statement. 100%. But what I did with that was I said, I don't need to follow Jesus' commands on the Sermon on the Mount, because what the Sermon on the Mount is there to do is to drive me to Jesus, to drive me to the foot of the cross, to say there's no way I can possibly fulfill any of those things that Jesus has said. So I'll go to the cross, I'll ask for forgiveness, and I will pretty much just ignore Jesus' teachings. I certainly won't take them seriously, and I won't try too hard to do them, because I just can't do it. It's too hard. Jesus' response at the end of the Sermon on the Mount to me: therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on a rock. We're talking about foundations. We're talking about the Bible. This is what